Eyewitness after eyewitness, same story. The Israelis fired on civilians near 8 points, killing and injuring scores of civilians in recent days, they say. Moreover, repeated testimony that they used drones to do it.
We were there lying on the floor since 4 a.m. and the drones were firing at us. The Israelis were firing at us. People were crouching on the floor, women and children. And in the end, all we left with is a can of fava beans.
Israel has not directly commented yet on its use of drones in these recent incidents. But it is a world leader in developing military drone technology. For these drones, sometimes called quadcopters, firing bullets is certainly possible.
We know of a lot of companies that advertise drones with small caliber weapons mounted on them. We know that the IDF has worked with some of these companies.
And a UK doctor who'd worked in Gaza gave this evidence to Parliament just a few months ago.
What I think I found particularly disturbing was that a bomb would drop maybe on a crowded, tented area, and then the drones would come down and pick off civilians, children. And we had description after description. This is not, an occasional thing. This was day after day after day.
Israel said that's a lie. We don't target civilians. And then there's a psychological dimension too. Listen to this sound. An Israeli drone by night over Gaza. The blaring sound of a screaming baby. The man filming says this is coming from the drone. He says if you go out to investigate the sound, you'll be shot. It's happened, he says. Israel claims it would never do anything so unethical as this.
But there is something about drones in terms of their persistence, the fact that they are very advanced, they're very mysterious. If there's a drone flying above your head, you have no idea if it's watching you, if it's going to drop a bomb on you, if it's going to target you. And that sense of sort of mysterious suspense, it adds a really dark dimension to the conflicts.
Load onto all of that, feeding the paranoia, or feeding the database, or both. Debate about how far AI drone tech can now identify human faces on the ground for targeting or leaving alone. The face, indeed, of modern war.
Well, here with me now is Palestinian lawyer Melina Ansari from the Human Rights Watch organisation. How should the use of drones change warfare? I mean, you'd have thought it means that whoever's controlling them knows precisely who they're pointing at, and that would reduce civilian casualties.
Yeah, well, it's a problem nowadays with the use of, modern technology in warfare, specifically drones. And we have seen cases such as the use of quadcopters and drones in Russia and Ukraine. And these are basically robots in control of firing a weapon, even if there's a person behind the screen pushing a button. And Human Rights Watch did document several other modern technologies that are being used in Gaza by Israeli forces, like investigating and looking into the artificial intelligence, Where's Daddy, or Lavender, or the Gospel, that Israel uses to specify military targets in the Gaza Strip. And the thing is, it's dangerous. While international law and the international community is exactly collaborating and looking into how to systemize and institutionalize the use of drones, we are still seeing them being used in warfare in violation of international law.
Okay, let's come to the main news today, which is the shooting of people trying to get to these food distribution points. I mean, what's your understanding of the international law here in terms of what's happened in these incidents?
Yeah, to begin with, international law started when this whole shenanigans of an ex-military personnel company leading aid distribution. The most important thing under international humanitarian law when it comes to distributing aid is that it's widespread, it's humanitarian, and it bears in mind the dignity of the people in need of this humanitarian aid, and it's accessible for everyone that's in need. The militarized, the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation is basically a militarized private contractors who are distributing aid. And we have seen notorious records of militarized aid distribution.
And I suppose Israel would say that's what was happening before with Hamas's involvement in stealing aid.
Yeah, these are Israeli allegations that we constantly hear about but never see evidence of. And really important
You've never
to
seen
note,
evidence of Hamas taking aid? I mean, surely.
So it's not really, we don't know if it's Hamas, if it's Palestinian armed groups, if it's Palestinian gangs in Gaza, because according to UN reports, and this is what we follow in monitoring, the United Nations has clearly said there are Palestinian gang groups who are being armed so far, and they say it's not by Palestinian armed groups or Hamas, who are being armed and looting some humanitarian aids in areas under full control of Israeli forces. What the UN is saying, there's no way these armed gangs could do what they do without the okay or permission of Israeli forces on the ground there. While we see Israeli forces use quadcopters and shooting people, why aren't they, for example, dealing with the looting? We haven't seen how Israeli forces are dealing with this.
But what is the solution when Israel doesn't accept the UN as an honest broker? It regards it as partisan and on the other side.
Yeah, well, the thing is, it's not on Israel to decide whether they want to work with the United Nations or not. This is under the United Nations Charter. Israel is obligated to cooperate with the United Nations institutions. And for example, UNRWA, Israel has a unilateral treaty with UNRWA that it alone, on its own, decided to stop. Let me remind you also that the International Court of Justice is looking into an advisory opinion into Israel's obligations towards UN entities in the occupied Palestinian territory. We're talking about Gaza, which falls under occupation of Israeli authorities. So Israel has an obligation to facilitate and collaborate with the UN.
Melina Ansari, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Now, first, the head of the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation resigned, saying the operation could not adhere to humanitarian principles. Now, the Boston Consulting Group, which helped establish the US and Israeli-backed aid distribution mechanism, is also jumping ship. Let's get more from our Washington correspondent, Siobhan Kennedy. Siobhan.
Well, that's right, Krishnan. And adding to the chaos on the ground, it's emerged now that the Boston Consulting Group, which is the US contractor that was hired to set up and run the new aid organization in Gaza, actually quit the job last week and terminated its contract with the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation. Now, in a statement to Channel 4 News, the Boston Consulting Group said that it was doing the work for free to help set up the new aid organization. And it added that unapproved follow-on work relating to Gaza lacked buy-in, it said, from multilateral stakeholders and was stopped on May the 30th. The Boston Consulting Group has begun a formal review of the work, and while that review continues, the partner who led this work has been placed on administrative leave. Now, it is not clear what that unapproved follow-on work was or why the partner in charge has been placed on leave. Should be noted, though, that the Washington Post did cite sources that said that the Boston Consulting Group actually charged $1 million a month for its work in Gaza.
Has there been any response from the White House?
Well, there has been a press conference in the last hour or so, and the White House press secretary was asked about the latest shootings, and she said that the administration was looking into the veracity, she said, of the reports and wouldn't take the word of Hamas as the truth. She was also asked about the change of leadership in the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, and just listen to what she said.
Well, look, this was a creative idea that the president called for to get aid into the region. These people were desperate and starving, and the president didn't like seeing imagery of that, and he wanted to ensure that aid was brought in with the approval of Israel for understandable reasons. We will never forget the brutal attack on October 7th. And again, this is something that the previous administration was unwilling to put the time and effort into doing.
Well, she seems to imply that the whole idea of this Gaza aid group was all President Trump's. Important to say in this respect, though, that the Boston Consulting Group as a private entity presumably would have been operating at arm's length from the White House. But today, the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation has announced that it has appointed, in fact, a pro-Trump evangelical pastor by the name of Johnny Moore to take over running the organisation.
Siobhan Kennedy in Washington.